So, if we could constitute the panel of 4 speakers then, please. You'll note there are only 4 chairs, so that we are off the book. I think you can chair yourselves. Okay. So I think this is the opportunity for wider discussion at this point, relating to anything that any individual speaker has addressed in their talk, but also to the common themes of this video.
My question follows. My question follows on actually from what we've just been discussing. I thought that was a really interesting and enlightening account of how different environments have shaped the history of bioethics on either side of the Atlantic. And I was particularly interested in what you were just talking about with respect to the role of governmental and public bodies and professional organisations in shaping the development of bioethics. As I understand it, what you're saying is that it was the niche, the gap that was left by the failure of professional medical bodies and of the government to act that meant that bioethics in the US went one particular way, whereas perhaps in the UK there was a more concerted response that meant that ethical challenges that came up were addressed. I wonder what you think of the recent move to disassemble some of our policy bodies, some of our regulatory bodies in the UK, and what you think and what the rest of the panel think that might mean for the future history of bioethics in this country and globally.
Since your question has to do with the UK, I'm going to turn it
as an observer.
turn it over to people from the UK. So I no comment on this end because I don't know the information about what's happening. But
so just to give you a couple of examples, and I mean, of course, I'm sure you might be aware of some of these, but things like the Human Genetics Commission being disassembled and the changes to the HFEA, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. So these are bodies that for a long time have had policy influence in the UK, which are now being rolled back, I guess.
Shall I pick that up then, because it's probably more in my field? Yes, it's the demolition of the Quango culture is being done for political reasons. Just because the Conservative ministers largely just want to say they're trying to reduce red tape. They're actually probably, in fact, doing nothing of the sort, because most of the functions for those bodies are going to need to remain, and so they'll just be wrapped up together in a new organisation. So the Health Protection Agency, for example, will become part of the new public health service in England. The question is the disruption it will cause in the meantime. So we are likely to see a vacuum. I think we just have to be fortunate that ministers, as was famously described as here today, gone tomorrow, won't be with us forever. And we just need to try and do our best in the circumstances in the meantime. Just one other thing I wanted to contribute to the debate around the UK sort of USA example is that if you looked at bioethics in the US, virtually all of the centres are based within schools of medicine or schools of public health. So when I worked in the US for a year as part of my Harkness Fellowship, I was based in the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and partly down in Georgetown in the Kennedy Institute as well. And of course I came back from sort of working primarily in some medical institutions and looked about where sort of my colleagues were working in the UK, and they're predominantly working in some philosophy departments, which may have significance as well to what we are discussing. It has advantages working in medical schools, because of the amount of perhaps money and profile associated with the research that goes with working in medical schools, but it also has some disadvantages because of the outputs that are expected as a consequence. So I just throw that into the discussion whether anybody else wants to pick up about some of the consequences of why UK and USA have gone slightly differently.
Okay. I think that one of the important answers to a question depends on what, for instance, happens to the policy development functions of the HFEA. Now, if they are downplayed, I think that whoever is Minister of Health at the time will very quickly reverse the decision the first time he or she has to make a decision on a contentious issue in assisted reproduction without being able to say, well, the HFEA is currently considering this, or I have instructed the HFEA to consider it. I don't think that politicians have fully realized how much hassle the HFEA has been shielding them from in the past. And of course, that is a function of official bioethics bodies. You can kick the ball into the long grass. And given the rapid turnover of ministers of health, you can almost ensure that you will not deal with the problem when it comes back.
Sorry. No, I was just quickly going to add. I have some sympathy with the reduction in, not least in the overlap between different bodies and in the, the HFEA separate from other ethics and governance bodies, and so I think it very much depends on what happens next. And I think there are some severe problems, for instance, like the recent consultation on gamete sale being separate from the other consultations on organ sale that are happening by the Nuffield Council, and the wider concerns about global markets. When these are dealt with separately, then a lot of the consequences and knock-on effects are not being addressed. So, I think there are things that needed to be addressed, but I think this is probably the wrong way to address them. But there's potential to do something better, perhaps.
Sorry, can I just come back on that one point? Can I just comment that I think it's also particularly interesting that the Academy of Medical Sciences is the body that seems to be the voice that is going to influence government about the direction this goes in, especially given the history of bioethics that we've been listening to. I think it's a particularly interesting political question, as well as perhaps a deeper question about how come the Academy of Medical Sciences is the voice that is proposing a new health agency that will take over these functions. And I don't know if Hannah has any thoughts on that, but it strikes me as something worth noting.
Yeah, that's very similar to the Coca-Cola designing public health worry in some ways. But there are a lot of rumours going around about other people having the ears of politicians and other suggestions being made. So I have heard some more positive suggestions of who's calling some of the shots. So I think, I kind of want to wait, so at least not in total despair.
Well, thank you. I have a question. Gibbs Bart, that's my name. Listening to the 4 lectures, I was a bit challenged to think not only about the past, but also about the future. What could happen to bioethics in the future? And I find at least 2 things striking. First of all, I have the impression that in the past, bioethicists tended to focus very much on, let's say, specific technologies that produce dilemmas for individual physicians. They were faced by these dilemmas, didn't know how to address them. Bioethicists was called in to assist, and the solution was good. Whereas I would say in the future, and as for example in Heather's story, 2 things seem to be changing. First of all, there seems to be a shift from specific technologies and the dilemmas involved into, producing new forms of knowledge and information, the biobanks and so on, and the implications that may have somewhere in the future. And secondly, rather than individual physicians or individual researchers challenged by dilemmas, we are now seeing the emergence of huge, large-scale international research teams, not with autonomous researchers, but with anonymous researchers rather. Large groups of people who are putting together these enormous biobanks with enormous amounts of information. And they are faced with different kinds of questions about applications that may arise somewhere in the future. We don't know yet how and when. And that seems to call for, let's say, a different kind of ethics with a more macro perspective, a broader perspective, more like public health than individual health, more focused on the implications of new forms of information than on dilemmas of specific technologies that are already there. So it's more anticipatory, more macro, more large scale, more collective rather than individual. Is that the future of bioethics? I was wondering because of my studies.
The history of bioethics is that it grows on the backs of scandal. It is the putting out the fires and making sure no future fires arise. The other part of the history of bioethics is if you read the journals, the Hastings Center Journal was always interested in genetics, always interested in genethics. The biobanking problems were anticipated 20 years ago, but whatever they wrote never quite hit the mark because they never quite got the technology right. There was no notion of stem cells. There was no, I mean, whatever they did, they didn't quite get it right. So bioethics always tries to anticipate the future, never quite hits the mark, but I don't think it matters in a way because you build a sort of reservoir of arguments, of positions thought through, so that when the inevitable scandal, problem, issue hits, if you understand and you read what's been written earlier, you can very quickly bring yourself up to speed on something that looks at first to be quite different. When Soren argued that you have to understand the history, in part because very, very clever people have been thinking about a lot of these issues, often for a very long time. And that is a resource that no one willingly, I mean, it's just silly to ignore it. So I think I wouldn't bet on what the future of bioethics is going to be because we actually don't know where the turns are going to come or where the politics are going to go, to go back to the first talk in the conference. But I do think that the reservoir of discussions that we built up will enable future bioethicists to be able to respond better.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities between sort of bioethics and public health for those sort of reasons that other members of the panel have talked about, that just as ethicists aren't loved until there's a scandal, public health isn't loved until there's a scandal. And I think just as I talk to my students about the dark arts of public health, we also need to be a bit more explicit about the dark arts of bioethics as well. And we need to see it will be the return or the development of the political philosopher. I mean, it's not as a philosopher of politics, but the philosopher who understands the dark arts of politics and how to influence things. And it happens on all sorts of levels, where we're always just trying to sort of snipe away and trying to influence people, form allies and things within sort of debates. Even to back home, this week I've been trying to sort out how we do sort of ethics review as part of one of our student courses. And I had a response back from the course leader saying, don't mess around with the course. It's important. Ethics is important, but well, not that important. And I had to think very carefully about, how I sent my emails around that, just to try and influence and gain sort of the moral high ground and things. And I think there are a lot of lessons for us, just rather than just being a backwater and commentating from afar. It's getting in there and sort of being part of the fight. In the same way that you described, how many of the bioethicists in the 1960s and the 1970s came out of the anti-Vietnam movement, etc. But that's not the way that philosophers often deal with things. We are seen as people who cause problems rather than, or to generate more problems and questions rather than sort of helping to answer them. I think we have to be careful but not shy away from the fight on that one.